Hello there. This is your host Manoj Agarwal. Welcome to this new episode of Bootstrapping Your Dream Show. I have a very special guest today. His name is George Bryant, and George is a New York Times best-selling author and one of the most highly sought-after digital marketing consultants in the world to teach his relationships beat algorithms approach to business. He has helped hundreds of largest companies in the world and thousands of entrepreneurs ethically scale their businesses by deepening their relationships with their customers and creating transformational breakthroughs that help them accomplish their goals. He believes a company's financial success is directly dependent on the amount of value they share before and after a purchase. Business is about relationships and touch points, and the companies who put relationships before transactions will win. That is the relationship beat algorithm approach. Welcome, George.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome, great. So one thing right off the bat, we notice about you, like I just cannot believe how much work, how much energy, how much focus you put in, and you take care of your community. Like I leave a comment at 2 a.m. and there is a response from you or your team within 30 minutes. I just don't know how you do it. How do you get that drive? How do you get that energy to serve at that level?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And the really short answer is because I didn't always do it the right way.
Mhm.
And, it took me, I'd say probably 9 years as an entrepreneur to realize that my life was very difficult because I was focusing on all the wrong things. I was focusing on the bank accounts or the transactions or the conversions. And the last thing in my brain was customers. And yet, on the other side of it, I was the first person to bitch when a company didn't treat me well. Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, am I really just complaining about myself right now? And I had to take a really hard look in the mirror. And I actually deleted social media. I walked away from 1.5 million followers across Facebook and Instagram overnight. And I didn't tell anybody. I just hit delete and I disappeared. And I spent 2 years in life, right, with my family, with people in my life. And I wasn't out there anymore. And it really helped get me regrounded in like, what is the purpose of business? What is the purpose of life? And what I realized is that everything I had in my life that was successful was predicated on relationships. And then very quickly realized that the only difference between social media or digital media and in person is that it's just a faster touch point of a relationship. And so it really helped kind of refocus my lens. And I just said that no business is ever built by convincing people that your product is the best. It's always built by enrolling people into their after state of their vision. And I kind of took that principle hard in the beginning and came out, and I had a lot of experience because I'd been an internet marketer for 8 years. I'd be successful, #1 app in the world, book, all that stuff. So when I came back with that skill set, with then this stacked on top of it, I realized that at the end of the day, when I die or when I'm in my hospital bed, not one person's going to come see me or visit me because they bought my product. And then I started to really understand humans and human psychology, and I became obsessed about it. And, I think about the things like, would I be okay if my daughter went through your funnel? Would I be okay if my wife bought your product? And I wanted to make it my mission that my legacy was that every single thing that I touched improved upon somebody's life. And I kind of turned it into a business. And quite frankly, it works. I've built $2 billion companies and taken over 300 companies into 7, 8, and 9 figures. And so really at the end of the day, all we have is people. And I think right now we're all seeing that, right? Like all we have right now is each other. And if it wasn't for social media, we'd be really lonely and isolated right now. Right. And so it's all about that connection point. So for me, the energy comes from the fact that my measuring stick isn't predicated on a result. It's not predicated on a transaction. Like I don't measure my value in the car I drive or the jet that I have, because I think, oh, that's a waste of money in the first place. And so I measure it on, did I make somebody's life better today? Did I move somebody closer towards their goal? And we carry this through all of our companies. In every company we own, we do this. And we'll be the first ones to lose money to gain a lifetime customer. And we'll be the first ones to honor a product deeper than anybody. You complain and tell me you didn't like it, I'll give you a refund and send you another one, just because I appreciate the fact that you trusted me in the first place. And I think it's the only way to do business. And quite frankly, and I'm going to make a bold statement, in the next 2 years, if people don't start doing business like this, they're not going to have a business.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. It's kind of surprising that that is how most relationships develop, and especially when you have to change, when money has to change hands, a lot of trust and credibility has to be built. And it's surprising that only a handful of people like yourself realize that and teach other people. In most cases, that is not the case, because most people are teaching automation and all that. So did you fall into that trap? You were very experienced marketer already.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, like, was there a trigger point? As you said, like, you were bitching about the bad service, but was there any conversation that happened? Or did you meet anybody that sort of shifted that mindset, or some mastermind event you attended or something along those lines?
No, it was actually, I was a week away from bankruptcy.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I followed all the principles, everything everybody taught me. I had 2 upsells, 3 downsells, escalation paths, and it was great. I ran a 7-figure business,
Mm-hmm.
and then it never grew.
I
And
see.
then it never grew. And then slowly the bottom line chased up the top line. And then slowly the bottom line surpassed the top line to the point where I was losing 40 grand a month because basically I'd created an anti-marketing machine. I had burnt so many bridges that I could never get them back. And the only difference is that it hurt bad enough for me to take it on the chin, to have an honest conversation with myself and the people who I affected, and I honored it. And I honored it to some painful points. Like, I gave many refunds, I gave many apologies, and I said, I'm so sorry. I literally did not know. And I was driven from fear, right? Like, I hadn't processed trauma in my life. I didn't understand, the fact that the success in my business was predicated on the success of the work I did here. And I avoided being in a relationship with the one person that I'm stuck with for the rest of my life, which was me. And so I used everything out there to kind of hide. And so all of it kind of culminated with the fact that my wife was 8 months pregnant,
No.
and I literally had about 2 weeks left before it was all gone. And I mean, all gone. And that was a big, scary moment. And it was in that moment that I ended up in a room full of my peers, and somebody asked a question, and I said, hey, listen, I used to do that. If you do that, you're going to go out of business. Can I please show you the new way to do this? And they said, yeah. And I ended up giving like a 45-minute talk to some of the biggest internet marketers in the world, people that you would know, every one of them.
Mhm.
And there were 22 people in the room, and 20 of them hired me.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
And so it was in the moment of like self-realization and self-awareness and really self-forgiveness
Yeah,
that I realized that, focusing on all the things I did wasn't going to make it better, but changing the way that I did it and leading other people through the right way was really going to make a big difference. And so that was kind of the big shift for me. And listen, it's not easy. Like, I probably leave $20 million a year on the table that I could easily get, right? It's a very morally challenging, kind of ethically challenging and integrity challenging thing. And I love it because there's plenty of times where I'm like, oh, if we did that, I'm like, no, that's not going to work. Like, no, it's temporary, right? And I tell people, hockey sticks aren't businesses.
yeah.
Launches aren't businesses, right? Like, and one of the mistakes that I made is that I was playing the business game year to year, right? Like, I was creating a finish line without playing the infinite game. And listen, like, now every one of my companies has 100-year vision, like far outside of me, far further than I will ever be here, right? Outlive some of my children potentially. And the reason that I tend to think like that now is because when I think like that, it eliminates the validation, the dopamine that comes for the temporary decisions or the tactics or strategies. And it makes sure that what we're building and what we're doing is progressing everybody forward, but also the companies and our impact and our mission, 50 years and 100 years from now. And so, yeah, it was scary. I mean, it was probably one of the scariest moments of my life. And I've been to war 3 times. I've lost 28 Marines. I've been in stuff that you never want to go through.
Yeah.
And none of them even came close in comparison to having a pregnant wife with my first child
Yeah.
and 2 weeks away from literally not being able to feed my family.
Yeah.
And so it was in that moment that I was like, and it was unpopular. I literally got ousted because I was like, hey guys, this can't happen anymore. And I was friends with all of them. And they're like, you're an idiot, you're dumb, you're whatever. I said, nope, because none of you are going to have businesses on your headstone, but you're going to have family members that know who you were and what you provided for them. And that's what I'm more interested in. And I walked away from probably, I wouldn't consider them friends, but I walked away from pretty influential circles and put a pretty big target on my back. And I was just willing to hold it. And I haven't gotten off of it since. So.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, these are tough moments. I think Tony Robbins says something along the lines of, when you burn, when you go to an island, burn all the boats, and then, you can survive. Because if you have plan Bs and things like that, we always procrastinate. we screw it up somehow, but when our backs are pressed against the wall, that's when the real human in us comes out, right?
Yeah, because you know what it does? It cuts all that. It cuts all the fluff out, right? It cuts all the things that we think are important. It cuts all the things out that the crazy beliefs or the paradigm beliefs that we had that like were running us, and it really forces us to get back into the driver's seat of our life and take a look at like, is this who I want to be? Is this what I want to create? Is this what I want to be known for? Is this what I want my kids to describe me as? Like, I had thoughts and visions of like, if somebody asked my daughter, "What do I do?" would I be proud of what she said? And
Yeah.
then I was like, no, because I don't tell my daughter what I do.
Mhm.
Because, right. And so now, like, my kids are a part of my business. Like, they're on my live streams, they're in my images, they're in my profile images. And like, I tell them, and they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, High Speed Daddy, we help men provide, protect, and connect. We sell diaper bags, but we donate 10% of gross to veterans. We have MPAC bars where we give protein bars to women, but we donate 10% of gross to get women out of abusive relationships. And then we have Crazy Muscle, and we donate to get, kids in inner city youth a
Yeah.
chance. And so, really what it is, it's like, when you think about it, I don't want to ever have to sit there and tell somebody, like, I don't want somebody else to write the narrative of my life, right? I don't want there to be any gray area when they're like, who was George Bryant? And I don't want there to be a narrative that I'm not proud of or that I didn't write. And so it was really important to me to kind of be different. And listen, I grew up in shit, quite frankly, right? Like sexual abuse, physical abuse, drug abuse.
Mhm.
The cops were at our house every day, welfare checks. I tried to emancipate myself. I was in and out of the hospital a few times. I was homeless for a couple years,
Wow.
and I joined the Marine Corps to run away. And then I've asked myself thousands of times, and I mean thousands of times, on spirit quests, on plant medicine journeys, on meditation ceremonies, silent days, why? Like, why did I choose that life? Like, why did I create that life as a child? And I'm like, because I get to break a cycle.
Mhm.
I get to break a cycle of addiction. I get to break a cycle of debt. I get to be the first one in my family to own a home, the first one to own a successful business, the first one to carve a path, and the first one to, instead of being so focused here and the pain, to heal the pain and then to use it to help other people so that my kids get to grow up in a different world. And that's where a lot of the drive comes from. And listen, I'm a machine, but there's days I'm tired. Like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm immune to any of this, right? It's that I just choose to suffer in silence. When things get hard, when I get scared, like when, like 4 weeks ago, I lost about $500,000 in one day,
Okay.
in literally pending contract deals that didn't close. And
Wow.
then between the three of my companies, we're down 78%, which means it goes from 5 figures a day to 3 figures a day. And
Wow.
so what did we do? Well, we cut our pay, we kept the employees' pay, and then we started giving out free product.
Wow.
Like, oh, you can't pay for it here, you can have it for free.
Mhm.
We'll make it back in 6 months when all of this lifts and it's over, right? And so I still feel the same feelings that everybody else does, right? It's just I choose to go in and deal with them. I wake up at 4 a.m. and spend 2 hours in silence.
Mhm.
And sometimes I don't like those thoughts. Sometimes I don't like that feeling. Sometimes I don't like what comes up. But in my experience in exploring those shadows is where clarity comes, responsiveness comes, growth comes. And so, I just try to choose to be a mountain and to breathe into it and to lean into it so that I can rewrite whatever it is that I rewrite. And, there's an entire world of opportunity, no matter what's happening out there,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm still, and I can only speak for myself, but I'm still 100% responsible for how I react, how I respond, what I choose to do or not do. And I spend a lot of time contemplating those things.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Now, I just want to let viewers know, there's a lot of bandwidth fluctuation going on. So the video quality is not as good, but the audio is good. So as long as you guys can hear us, let's make sure that, we provide a lot of value through our content. But I apologize for the video quality. The bandwidth is like everybody's streaming these days. So
I know. I know. I just checked on my end. So I made sure everything's good on our end. So we'll see if we can keep it clean.
sounds good. Yeah. So this notion about self-awareness that you brought up is magical, because I have gone through similar experiences, and one thing that struck me was breaking that generational cycle, which has happened exactly for me as well. It wasn't. I had a rough childhood, and that was how it's supposed to be, like for boys especially. And that has been carried over for generations, and I had to figure out what the heck happened, like why did I choose that life. And to your point, the answer was so that I can break the cycle with my boys. Now, this notion about self-awareness that you brought up, like you really need to be so honest about what your shortcomings are, what your strengths are. But a lot of people don't, like, they just sort of have a cursory awareness about themselves, and most of the time they focus on another invisible goal. They want to be Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, or whatever. They're chasing somebody else and not focusing on themselves. Will you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, ask it again. Let me think on it again.
Cool. In your, you said that you had to dive within, deep inside, and find out who George Bryant is, and sort of, face your fears and all your weaknesses and strengths. How self-aware other people are, in people you have worked with or you come in contact with.
Yeah, I think, you know what I think is interesting, and this is a pretty bold statement, but I think everybody's self-aware,
Mhm.
and based on our level of safety, right? Trust, what's around us, our container that we're in, we either choose to trust it and act on it or ignore it because our basic needs aren't being met, right? So like if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of
Yeah,
needs,
yeah,
there's no self-actualization that comes if you don't have access to basic food, water, and shelter.
yeah, yeah,
And that's out of survival. And I think innately, we all know what that feeling is like in our stomach. We all know when we're making a decision and we're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? But also, I don't think it's a choice. A lot of the times that I believe in 100% responsibility, right? But there's also other things at play right now. And so I think everybody is self-aware, but some people don't have the container or the opportunity to act on it. And, you know, I think every human innately, like as human beings, we seek out information, we seek out tips and tricks and knowledge because we always want to better ourselves. And I think just innately knowing that comes from a level of self-awareness, because if you want to improve, you also have to know where you are, right? And so I think it's giving yourself, for me, it was giving myself the space and time to understand that, right? And so, like, for example, entrepreneurs, we're convinced that if you do more, you'll have more.
yeah.
But the truth is, if you do less, you'll have more.
Oh, really?
And it's such an interesting concept, right? Because if you do less with hyper focus and intention, you'll create better results rather than doing more
Yeah.
of reactive and things like that. And so, one of my biggest areas of struggle is that I never gave myself the space to be aware. How can I be aware of myself when I'm on Instagram, I'm creating content, I'm on interviews, I'm on meetings, I'm launching products, I'm writing emails. It's from 5 a.m. at the gym until, 10 p.m. when I decide to turn my phone off. Like, where in that space do I even allow myself to know who I am, right? Like, I'm basically was addicted to avoiding a relationship with the one person I needed it with first. And so I think everybody's innately a human being, is self-aware. And I think what we have to look at is, how do we live in this world that we live in, but also create a container of space so that we can be in that relationship, to have that understanding and to have that space to be able to look within. And, I run a men's group with my amazing business partner, Stefano Stefandos. And, one of the things that we talk about, and we have really deep philosophical conversations, like Vedanta philosophy, like I'm talking about creation and quantum physics and things like that. But really the recurring theme that we coming up with is that at the end of the day, awareness is the win. Awareness is the finish line, right? And I think that when you give yourself the space to kind of be with yourself, to know yourself, to be in love with yourself, to give yourself the space to kind of fall in love with the things that happen up here, and here, and be okay with them, that is the finish line. Because when you're aware, you always have the ability to choose, right? And so I do really believe that every single human is self-aware, and most of us just haven't created the containers that have allowed that exploration or discovery to exist. And when you do that, sometimes I don't like what it's like in the dark. I'm still afraid of the dark in some of those moments. Like when it's 4:30 in the morning, like tomorrow morning, and I'm sitting downstairs and I'm outside doing a cold therapy walk in 20 degrees, which is like -3 Celsius for all you Canadian people. there's times where I want to quit. I want to walk inside. I don't like the thought that's coming up. I'm afraid of that feeling, but I also need to fall in love and have those shadows for light to exist. And so I tend to allow myself to kind of sit in it and be a witness to it rather than react to it or try to stop it or try to prevent it or try to push it down. And I credit my ability to maintain structure in the time now. Like, I mean, I'm losing about 60 grand a day right now that I don't have, right? Like I have credit card bills that I was like, oh, it's the first time in 10 years. I actually just can't pay it off right now. That's interesting, right? But I also credit my ability to be able to look at it as an opportunity and understand that that's just the field because of the space that I give myself. Because this morning I processed out a whole lot of scarcity, right? And I cried and then I was angry. And it was really interesting because nothing happened. It was just things that were going on up here. But at the end of it, when I took out my notepad and I started writing, I was so clear and confident on what I was doing, what I was creating, where we were going, how we were going to pivot. And so that's really how I see it. And I think for entrepreneurs, it's probably, I actually recorded a podcast on this on my podcast. It's literally the biggest mistake in business, and it's the one that's free to fix. And all it requires is a little bit of intentionality to be like, hey, you know what? Today, I'm putting containers on my day. I know, and let me just dispel this for every entrepreneur. There's no secret that we will always have something to do. That's the trap. Entrepreneurship is the never-ending to-do list. That is what we do. But if you allow that to be the truth, you are a slave to the entrepreneurship or a slave to the business rather than you being the owner and the visionary of the business. And so, you know, like I don't start working until 10 a.m. every day and I stop at 5 p.m. And in that I take lunch, I see my kids. And so in that time, I have to run 8 companies, produce a podcast, go live, take calls, run my mastermind, create content for my courses, write my emails, and do strategy calls with clients. And I only have a team of 2.
Wow.
Right? But when you start to put those containers on, right? And it's like, I could have a ton of people right now be like, I'm like, I need you to run a mile in 9 minutes. Like, I can't do it. I'm like, I'll give you $1 billion. They'll run a mile in 8 minutes. Right?
Yeah, I can.
And so for me, I put those containers on my day because they kind of force focus. They force intentionality. They eliminate backdoors and distractions. But that also means that when I wake up at 4 a.m., I have 6 hours of time to be with just me and the things that are in my life before I get into distraction. And this is where growth happens for me. Because like I find myself at 8:15, like wanting to pick up my phone. I'm like, nope, don't do it. I'm like, oh, what am I trying to avoid? Like, what am I pretending not to feel? Right. And, you know, it's very, very, but like Steve, you've had Steve on the show, right? Steve Sims, right? I'm sure if I asked 100 people that watch Steve for a week, can you explain to me how he gets done what he gets done? The answer would be no. Yeah. Nobody understands. He's omnipresent. He's everywhere. And I love Steve to pieces, right? But it's because he's intentional about everything that he does. He has that container and he respects that container. Jeff Spencer's the same way, right? The champion's mindset is about understanding that temperance, right? If you train to 100% every day, in a week you can't train anymore. And really the difference between an Olympic athlete and a regular athlete is that an Olympian only trains to 70%. I see. So they can come back tomorrow and come back the next day and come back the next day because they're playing the long game. So as an entrepreneur, yeah, it's really easy to go from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. to 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., right? But that's the short game. Yeah. And when you play the short game, you create short results. And so for me, those containers and that concept of like really having the intentionality of that and the discipline to hold it. Because listen, when it's 4 a.m., the only person who knows whether I'm up or not is me. Yeah. When I say I'm doing an ice bath every day, the only person who knows if I do it is me. And that's where the work happens. Like being in a relationship with the person that like on this shoulder, it's like, do it. This is your, like, you don't have to do it. It's so comfortable in your bed. Nobody will know. Right. Like, and it's like that. And so it's something that I think is literally the most underutilized tool that entrepreneurs and anybody in their life has in their arsenal. And it's in that intentionality that results come. And that intentionality only comes when you have the space to figure out the path and then make sure everything you're doing is on track to get there.
I mean, this is such a relevant point, and I think I want to emphasize on this is that a lot of time we say these things, we understand that we need time to think and clarify our thought process, and most of the time, in 99% of the cases, most people just squash it right away, say I don't have time. But now this excuse doesn't work. So this is the perfect time to put this into practice. Like, just as George said, like spending some time with yourself, with your thoughts, and just noticing what is going on. And maybe, George, do you have any other, like, you mentioned ice baths, you mentioned
Yeah.
a few other things. Do you want to, like, can you share a few
Yeah. Yeah.
rituals that you
Sure.
do? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. And you know what's funny about that before I share? You know what's funny? If we went back 8 weeks and checked most entrepreneurs' Instagrams, they'd all be like, I wish I had more time with my family. I wish I had more time with my kids, right? And now they have it. And what are they trying to avoid?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's called dissonance. Stop lying to yourself if you want to be successful. Be fucking honest, and then you'll achieve your goals. Because it's really, really funny. And then the other part that I like making, everybody right now, I'm watching entrepreneurs flip out, right? The definition of entrepreneur is somebody who loves uncertainty. We literally create roads that don't exist. We create products that have never been here. We literally jump into the black abyss, not knowing what's down there, trusting we're going to make it. And I was like, well, you're welcome. The entire world just turned into exactly what you've been working for every single day. So let's not pretend that we're not thriving right now. But really what the difference is how you're choosing to see it, right? And that comes down to practice. And so, for me, I'll share my my morning routine, because I am the guy that's like, meditation stupid, I can't sit still. And then I'm also the guy that studies like Thich Nhat Hanh and Vedanta philosophy and things like that. And so, for me, what I make sure of every single day is that at least the first hour of every day of my day is spent in solitude with no external triggers, like no phone, no family, no kid, no email, no nothing. Like, it's literally just me, myself, and I. And in that, sometimes I do breath work, right? So box breathing, or a 4-7-8 breath technique, or the Wim Hof technique. And then personally, I love cold therapy. And I didn't fall in love with cold therapy because of the mental capacity. I fell in love with it because I almost lost both my legs in 2005, and I was addicted to narcotics for 8 years of my life. Pills, hydrocodone, because I have scars from ankle to kneecap on both legs, and I can't feel them from the knee down. And so I had done nerve blocks. I'd had surgery. I had Imitrex injections. I had Botox injections. I had everything you can imagine. I went through like 17 modalities. I was on like 15 different pain pills plus PTSD and all these other things. And I was dying because like I was living in this body, but there was nothing in here, like nothing. It was like I was like drooling, and I have no idea how I was successful at all. Like, I was so heavily medicated. And then I met Wim Hof, and a friend introduced me, and a friend had been raving, and I was like, I hate being cold. Like, you're out of your mind, right? And he's like, no, listen, I want you to try it. And he's like, but if I do it with you, you're going to do it just to prove me wrong, because that's what your story is, that you have to prove yourself, right? He's like, so what I want you to do is I want you to go home and I want you to do it for 30 days on your own.
Oh, wow.
And so I built an ice bath, and I said, okay, I'm going to really push myself. I'm going to get up at 4 a.m. every day. I'm going to quit caffeine, cold turkey, and I'm going to take an ice bath at 4 a.m. And then when I'm done, I'm going to record a video and post it on YouTube for 30 days. And the first 10 days, I didn't make it more than 15 seconds in the ice bath. And then it was something along that lines. The next morning, I was like, God, like, I just keep quitting on myself. Like, I'm not going to die in the cold. Like, what am I avoiding feeling? What's not here? And that 11th day, I did 14 minutes in 33 degrees. So 1 degree Celsius.
14 minutes. Wow.
Yeah. 14 minutes. Yep. And so I got out, and that entire day was the first day I had no pain in my legs, like none. And I was like, what is this? And then, like, of course, I'd given up caffeine. I was now kind of in the routine of waking up early. And I was like, okay. So the next day, 10 minutes, 14 minutes, it was easy. I started doing like 15 minutes every morning. And then I started noticing, not only was I in physical pain, emotionally, I was super stable. I felt in control of my day. I felt like everything was intentional. And literally, I was getting hit with the same triggers that were causing flashbacks and spatial unawareness flashbacks and nightmares, and they were all gone. Wow. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't triggered. I wasn't in, fight or flight. And I was like, what is going on? And then on day 30, I celebrated and I live streamed the ice bath, and I did 37 minutes in 1 degree Celsius or
Wow.
33 degrees Fahrenheit. And I realized in that moment that I could have stayed in there for 2 hours. Like I could have just stayed. And it was all about my breath and my intentionality, right? Like it was navigating that discomfort for 90 seconds, and then it goes away, and then you can sit in there forever. And I was like, where else in my life do I never make it past 90 seconds? I was like, oh yeah, there's tasks I start and I quit. There's things that I start and I stop. And 90 seconds is relative to whatever it is that it is. I was like, but I never give myself the opportunity to break past that discomfort. And so just so everybody knows, that's kind of where it came from. And so a part of my morning practice now is just making sure I'm intentional with my day and that I give myself the time and the space. And some days I take ice baths, some days I take cold showers, and I'm currently in the mountains. And so we just had 3 feet of snow. So when I get up at 4:30, I will put on a bathing suit and I will go barefoot and I'll go walk for 2 miles outside. And it's like 20 degrees Fahrenheit and I'm walking in the snow just to kind of trigger myself. But really, like, I'm not going to die. I'm 5 minutes from my house. I'm not going to get hypothermia. I'm not going to pass out with a heart attack. And I'm just literally training my capacity. Scott Carney and Wim Hof, they call this the wedge, right? When I think about life, we're kind of hit with triggers all day: stress, money, insurance, fights, bills, jobs, business, right? Those are all triggers. And what typically happens is we get triggered and we immediately react, right? Because we haven't trained our capacity to hold, to respond. And so that's what they call the wedge. So for me, every single time I do something that I don't want to do that makes me uncomfortable, I'm increasing the distance between trigger and response, right? My ability to hold. We call that the wedge.
Got it.
And I literally think that that's the reason that I'm successful, the reason that I'm in the current moment losing the money I am, and I'm like completely confident and smiling through it. Like, okay, cool, right? Like I'll run up a credit card, a line of credit, and then I'll fix it, and then I'm fine because it doesn't even trigger me anymore. And there's days that I get past it, and there's definitely days when I don't have my practice that I feel off kilter. But my practice is really centered around simplicity. It's a little bit of space, a little bit of breath, and a little bit of discomfort in whatever container I can fit it in. And it might be 10 minutes, it might be an hour. And then there's days where I'm just addicted to it and I go 5 hours of silence and solitude, right? My wife's like, where are you going? I'm like, I'm going for a long walk. I'll be back at 9 a.m. And she's like, did you just walk for 5 hours? And I was like, yeah, with no phone and no music. Imagine that one, right? And she's like, what happened? I'm like, I kind of went on like a spiritual journey. I was like, I felt like I was on ayahuasca again. It's kind of nuts. I didn't even have to take anything.
Wow.
And that tends to be like my practice. And so we talk a lot about, practice in the men's group and in my businesses, with my business partners, with my students, everything. But I think what's really important is that the only perfect practice is the one that you do. And it doesn't have to look any way. Like my morning walk is meditation. My ice bath is meditation. Me sitting here after this call for 2 minutes, just being with my thoughts, is technically meditation, right? Because the definition of meditation is being present, right? To what's here, right? So there's times where like I'll be distracted in the day and I'll take 2 breaths and I'll like study my hand. And I'm like, God, it's nuts that like 100,000 miles of blood pumps through this thing every day. And I forget that it's there and I take it for granted, right? Like I don't acknowledge it when I have it, but yet if you were to cut it off, I would miss it every single day, right? And so when I think about practice, it's really just being intentional and consistent, right? Because consistency will always trump intensity. And the mistakes I made for years were like, I'm going to meditate for an hour a day. Then I'm going to do this 3-hour workout. And then I'm going to read for 2 hours a day. Then I'm going to journal for an hour, right? And I'm like setting the game up to fail from the get-go and missing the whole point, right? And so for me, it's like just making sure that your practice just is anything that gives you space intentionally that you choose to do. And then you intentionally do something in that space. You could sit Indian style. You could stretch. You could do yoga. You could do breath work. You could do mindfulness. You could read. You could journal. You could record audio. Whatever it is that you want to do. In my opinion, the secrets to practice is intentionality and then the integrity and the discipline to maintain it, right? And so, one of the things that people like to tell me is they're like, oh, well, sometimes you just get lucky. And I'm like, luck happens at the intersection of intentionality and discipline.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where luck happens, right? Like everyone's like, oh, that overnight success. I'm like, oh, you missed the 8 years of suffering in silence, right? Of doing the same thing when people are like, you won't make it, or you can't do it, or that can't be done. And I'm like, okay, cool. And like a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. And so, I think everybody needs a practice. And I'm not like a big fan of like, oh, it's a morning routine or it's like an evening routine. It's like, no, it's an intentional practice, right? Just like, like when you have to pee, you go pee. You're like, I'm going to the bathroom. This is what I'm doing. Like, that's intentional, right? Like when you wake up and sometimes before you go to bed, you're like, God, what do I want to eat for breakfast? That's intentional. You're like, this is what I'm going to eat, as long as you maintain it, right? If you say you're going to have X, Y, and Z for breakfast and you wake up and you're like, oh, I'm too lazy, I'll grab this thing. Well, now you broke your practice, right? And if you lie to yourself, there's no way you can get results in the world. So for me, practice just comes down to intentionality and then having the honor and the integrity and the discipline to do it for you and not for anybody else, right? It's not a practice if you tell all your friends and you post about it. It's a practice when nobody knows it's happening.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's kind of my thoughts on practice.
That's great. Yeah. So self-awareness seems like self-awareness, intention, and self-discipline is the key. And as you have put it, a lot depends on what goes inside. We have a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of professionals. Some of them, they have lost their jobs. Some of them have been laid off. But I think the core message, what you're sharing is, no matter what happens outside, if you're strong within, then everything else you can change, you can handle, you can figure out, right?
Yeah, like if you want a good read, go read anything from Viktor Frankl. Anything from Viktor Frankl, anything from a Vietnam POW, anything from any POW, and I forgot the syndrome. It's like stock something syndrome. And there's Nelson Mandela. There's a whole lot of them that are out there, right? But there's a whole lot that happens out there, and we're the only ones that take it and let it define who we are.
Yeah.
But like nothing, like that's not me. Like if my wife is upset, that's not mine. I might have been a trigger, but it's hers, and I get to love her and be empathetic, right? But it's not mine.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we practice here, like we only get one life, right? And there's only one of two things happening. You're either going forward or you're going backwards. Right. There is no standing still. A lot of people watching Netflix right now. They're like, no, I'm just chilling. I'm like, nope, you're regressing years and you don't even realize it. Right. Like you might watch 30 days of Netflix and it's going to take you 3 years to get back to where you were.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's a lot easier to go that way than it is like to down the hill than it is to go up the hill. Right. And so for me, it's about that intentionality and really understanding that, you can't say like, oh yeah, I'm responsible for that in my life, but nope, that's not mine. Or I'll own that, but not that. No, it's 100% responsible 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Every single time. Like every single thing that happens in your life is yours. And it's a really deep concept that it's been explored many, many times. And, I'd recommend like diving into it, but there's some deep things that come from it where it's like, I take it to the theory of like, I'm responsible for this pandemic, right? And not that I may have been able to prevent it, or maybe I could have, right? An action I took a month ago or a year ago, right? But that's a very empowering interpretation versus like, this is happening to me, right? Or I'm out of control. And those are the things that really we get to practice every day. And like, listen, we probably have 100,000 thoughts a day, right? And I'd say right now, probably 100 of mine are positive, and I'm still retraining the other 900, right? And that's the part of the practice, right? And it's like practice it and practice it and practice it and practice it. But I've definitely seen a correlated result between everything in my life to the depth of my practice, right? And so we said this to our men's group. A lot of people were asking like, hey, the world's calling for leaders. How do I serve them more? And our response was deepen your practice.
Yeah. Awesome.
Right? Because service isn't out there. Service is here, because then when you work here, you can give away that man or that woman that the world needs out of a place of like a full tank. And so that's kind of how I see it. It's probably how I can balance 8 companies at a time and do it in like 3 hours a week.
That's amazing. Very, very deep message here. So I hope people actually, really ponder this and incorporate it into their life. So, by the way, I just wanted to mention, a lot of people may not know Wim Hof. So Wim Hof is like a pioneer in cold therapy, and he has devised some breathing exercises, and he works with really like ice and cold water and everything, and he brings about like miraculous healing. So check him out.
It's all scientifically studied as well, which is mind blowing. Everyone, my favorite thing, everyone's like, if you fall in the ice in like 5 minutes, you're going to die of hypothermia. I'm like, I jumped in that ice for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
right? Right. And it's really interesting, right? That's a part of it, right? And I don't want to call anybody a lemming or a sheeple or anything, but like I challenge every thought and belief. And not that I want to oppose it, but I'm like, who says that is true? Like, why can't it be different? Like, not to be in danger, right? But to think about what's possible, that that thinking, that thought process, like Wim didn't get to that point
Mhm.
by reading and believing what everybody else said. Wim went alone into the world and started trying things after he lost his wife
Yeah.
and was a single parent to his children, and literally said he had no purpose to live, and he started exploring the parts of himself. He spent time in solitude and alone, and then found the cold, and then all of a sudden now the world has changed because of Wim Hof. And so it's a pretty powerful message, both in what he teaches but also the
Uh-huh.
journey and where he got to where he is right now.
Yeah. So the message is like, in each one of us there is a George Bryant, there is a Wim Hof. That trigger point of whatever that needs to happen in your life. Maybe this is the trigger point, right? Like a lockdown. Um, it's very unfortunate that most people will let this crisis go to waste, but not use it for evolving into their higher self. So I think that is the message of this episode, that you have all the time in the world. There's lots of information available, lots of help available. um, Incorporate that into your life and utilize this time to evolve into much better version of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a perfect time to do that. Now, I know we are way over time. Are you okay for
You're
one
good.
more?
You're good. Oh yeah, we're good. Go ahead.
I want to talk to you about relationships, because that is one. And then, in fact, I have one more question.
Two.
So let's talk about the second one first, because it's more relevant here. Self-discipline is a hard thing to come by, and I know you incorporate really understanding your why in the lighthouse method that you teach,
Mm-hmm.
and that why is directly linked to your self-discipline. So
Yes.
can you help us understand what does this mean, this why?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Such a good question. Yeah. So one of the ways that I teach business or marketing is I use this lighthouse concept, right? So you've heard companies for years have missions and visions, right? Nothing like fancy words that mean absolutely nothing. That's basically how I look at them, right? So I built the lighthouse, and I use a lighthouse on purpose, because when a lighthouse is built, it has to be able to withstand hurricanes and gale force winds and storms. And the only thing that could ever go wrong with a lighthouse is that it has to turn its light off and people die, right? And so lighthouses are built to maintain for centuries, right? And so I use a lighthouse as an analogy when it comes to business, and I break it up into three sections. The bottom of the lighthouse is your why, the middle of the lighthouse is your what, and the top of the lighthouse is your how. And if you want to learn, like, I teach all this stuff for free, it's mindofgeorge.com. But the why is what's so important right now. Now, the why is the base on purpose, right? And so for me, you don't have a life and you don't have a business if it's predicated on a result, because that's not really a why, right? And so I split up the bottom into two sections: a business why and a personal why. The personal why is what gets you out of bed every morning, right? And I'm not enough to get myself out of bed. If left to my own devices, I will be lazy, I will overeat, I will binge watch Netflix, I will do whatever, right? And so for me, my why is to give my 15-year-old daughter the example of a man that she gets to marry, and my 3-year-old son the ability to grow up as a man that I didn't have, without the trauma, the abuse, and the drugs. And there's plenty of days that I think about addictions, that I think about going back, that I think about what it felt like to be numbed out and not have a care in the world, right? And in those moments, without my why, it's a really easy path to go back there, right? And so my why is my higher power, except my higher power is not out there, it's in here.
Mhm.
It's my determination to change the world for my children and what they grow up with, right? And so I make that the base of it. And in business, we have a why as well. And I tell people that the why of your business can't be predicated on a credit card, or else it's not a business.
Yeah,
It's just high-end prostitution. And that's not a business. That's not going to change people's lives, right? Like Nike's not like, just do it only when you pay me.
yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's how I take the why concept. And so for me, my question I ask myself is, if the world is against me, like if I literally feel like I've lost it all, if they took my money, they told me I'm going to die in 2 days, boom, 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 boom. What's the one thing that would make me keep going and not just quit?
Mhm.
And that's how I find my why.
Awesome.
That's how I find my why. And that is what goes at the base of every single thing that I do. And so I took my why and I wrote a mission statement for my life, which is where the lighthouse came from in business. But my mission statement was to stand with structure, in the face of resistance to create possibility. And it was my way of saying, I'm going to use my story, keep training my heart, my soul, and my mind so that I can be that lighthouse in a storm and help people realize that they can overcome anything they want and be anybody they want. And that kind of became my why and where the lighthouse came from. And so I credit that with the reason why, in the fact that I'm probably in one of the toughest situations I'll ever be in my life, and I'm smiling about it and completely calm and confident. Like there's no energy in my body that's off. I'm not scared. I'm not anything. I'm like, okay, got it. Right. Like, and it's because like when it gets hard, I think about like, what an opportunity, like, where's the message in this? Where's the mission in this? Where's the opportunity in this? And so one of the things that I like to tell people is that part of intentionality is having a why under every part of it, right? There's no point in doing something just to do something, right? That's distraction and disconnection.
Yeah.
And so I like to keep my why simple because I'm not the brightest crayon in the box. I'm just really tenacious, right? And so the way that I think about it is every single thing I do in my life, business and personal, is for this reason, which is my children and recreating it. And then I just made it easy. Every single thing I do in my business is for them as well. So I have one why for all of it. And so, yeah, when I go to the coffee shop and I realize that I want to go for a drive for 20 minutes just to be alone, I have to ask myself, why do I want to be alone? What am I trying to avoid feeling? And I was like, oh, because I want to be disconnected. Nope. I turn the car on, I go home, and I'm like, I'm hanging out with my kids for 20 minutes, right? Because of this why. And so for me, it's the difference between success and failure. And I'm not one that really believes in failure. I only really believe in failure. Like if you make the same mistake multiple times and you keep choosing to make it, then I'm like, okay, but that's not failure. That's choice. Right. And so for me though, like if you looked at it on paper, the difference between success and failure is the why, because that why is what keeps you grounded, regardless of the pressure, regardless of, where we are. And, luckily I'm an entrepreneur. I don't work for anybody else, but would much rather have had a $65,000 a year pay cut than a $60,000 a day pay cut right now. And in that, right, and as business owners, and I'm saying this transparently, I own multiple 7 and 8 figure businesses, but every dollar of those companies goes back into those companies. My salary is $2,000 a month from my company. That's it. And that just got cut, right? So we don't live this extravagant lifestyle. It's like, yeah, it's in the company, but yeah, it doesn't mean it's like sitting in liquid assets in the bank account, right? And so I credit our ability to lead our customers and to lead our families and to lead our businesses and our employees because we're so grounded in the why. And our why isn't we only exist as a company to sell products. No, we exist as a company to help people. And right now we get to do that without making any money. And be very intentional and smart about it. And for anybody that's really, if you want to explore this concept deeper, Simon Sinek, amazing man, wrote an amazing book called The Infinite Game. And there's some real life examples in there of companies that would have folded if they didn't think like this. And because of it, they ended up 20xing their company. One of them was Victorinox, the Swiss Army knife company, because on September 10th of 2001, Swiss Army knives accounted for 82% of their revenue. On September 12th, they accounted for less than 10%. Because September 11th happened and then they were banned from being on airplanes. But no, they didn't furlough anybody. They didn't lay anybody off. They gave their engineers a raise. They went to work behind the scenes for a year and came out. And now they are like 150 times bigger. And Swiss Army knives only account for about 20% of the revenue because now they have watches and clothing and tools. And they literally expanded because they were able to hold and respond versus react. And so the why, everything has to have a why, right? Like there's no reason to be here. We're not here to figure out why we exist as a human. We're not here to talk about existential. This is that like some meat suit that somebody put me in. That's not my soul, right? Like we can sit here and pretend we're taking a red pill and understanding the matrix all day, but all of that stuff is just distraction from presence. And really presence is knowing what we're doing and having a reason why we do it. And that level of intentionality in personal life and in business tends to deconstruct what most people have as beliefs, right? Like how can you run 8 businesses a day in only 2 hours? I'm like, well, Richard Branson runs 224 a day in 2 hours a day. Right. And he knows every single CEO and every single decision in those businesses. Right. And so when you're grounded in your why, I feel like you have vision and sight. And when you don't have a why, I feel like you're really blinded and you can't really see above the ledge of like where you're going. And so it's really, really important.
So Very, very true. So, there are a few questions here in the audience. I mean, they're all talking about what they want to do, how they want to progress. But as you said, like really, if you can take anything from this talk, is first understand your why, because that will, once you understand that, the drive to go wherever, find your path, it becomes so automatic that
Mhm.
the doors sort of open up for you, right? The
Thousand
doors show
percent.
up, because otherwise you're trying to follow somebody else's path, and the doors that they are going through, they may not be visible to you, because you don't know what your purpose is.
Yep.
So if you get down to that level of understanding, then you will find your own doors, and they'll be very, very visible to you. And now one more question, if you have some time,
Yeah,
is
please.
about relationships, because I know you emphasize that much deeper. How do you build these relationships, especially if, like, I'm an introvert, I had tough time building relationships. Even when I remember when I talked to you first time on Facebook, I named you incorrectly because I was sort of like all over the place. So these kind of clumsy things happen with the introverts like myself. So how do you build these relationships? What is your method of doing this?
Yeah, and I got to give you credit too because I loved it. It was an opportunity and you came to me and I was like, "Hey, this is how you'll have a relationship with me because this is my container." But you're not really an introvert. I'll tell you that right now. I know you're not. But what I love about you is you're like, "Okay, right? You didn't get defensive. You didn't, oh, what an opportunity. What an opportunity." That's why you're good at relationships, right? The secret to relationships is authenticity, right? Like raw, unapologetic authenticity. Like I could sit here all day and I could tell you that I've consulted the biggest companies in the world. I've built billion-dollar companies. I own all of them. And I could make it appear anyway. And I'm like, no, I struggling to pay a credit card for the first time ever. And yet technically I'm a multimillionaire, right? Like there's a whole lot of things, but that's the only thing that creates a container of trust,
Yeah.
right? Because listen, we're humans. We know we all have spidey senses. You can smell bullshit from a mile away. And it doesn't matter if it's in written word, visual, audio, video, or in person. You can smell it, you can see it, you can taste it, right? And so there's nothing wrong with being an introvert, right? And so first thing you have to ask yourself is why do I want to build a relationship, right? And if the answer to that isn't because I want to help people, it's normally because I want to avoid something or not be in something or I want to do something, right? So it first starts with understanding why you want to do it.
Yeah,
Then once you understand why, then you have a really solid ground to stand on. And then when you have conversations, you can have a conversation and be like, you meet somebody and you really want to talk to them and you're like, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, well, say that. Hey,
yeah.
listen, I'm an introvert. I really am interested in building a relationship with you. And I
Uh,
have no idea what to say to you. And I'm scared shitless right now.
wow.
And every single person, and it doesn't matter who they are, would trust you in a heartbeat, right? Like
Yeah.
that's Steve Sims in a heartbeat. That's Jeff Spencer in a heartbeat, right? Anybody who knows themselves will respect and love that in a heartbeat. Anybody who wasn't interested in a relationship in the first place. They wanted something or there was some sort of agenda there, right? And so the only thing you can control every day is you. And only you can choose to show up in the world how you choose to show up. And so my advice is be authentic because I have never met you in person. I saw you at Steve's thing and Steve's a friend and a partner of mine. Jeff's a friend and a partner of mine. I was like, this guy's got to be amazing. And then we start talking I'm like, yeah, like I gave you feedback because I want to be your friend, not because I'm like, I don't want to, right? And I'm like, yeah, and you were honest with me. I'm like, God, I love this dude. Yeah, let's do a call. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it, right? And I get requests for thousands of interviews a day and thousands of calls. I mean, maybe a year, I'm exaggerating, but in a year, I probably get hit up. We get 3 to 4 emails a day, 5 to 6 messages. Can I interview you? Can you do this? Can you do this? And we have to say no.
Yeah.
And I just don't have that time, right? And so for me, the secrets to relationships are always just being on solid ground. The only way a relationship can be built is if the ground is solid. And that means you have to be authentic. You have to be honest. If you're scared, say you're scared, right? If you're having a shitty day and someone's like, how's your day? Please don't say good because I'm literally never going to talk to you again
Yeah.
because we can tell, right? And I'm like, if we're gonna be friends, and you're like, "Hey man, how's your day?" And I'm like, "Oh man, I'm happy, but I struggled a bit today. Thanks for asking." Right? Doesn't mean we have to explore. It doesn't mean I have to give you intimate details, but that is an honest conversation. Because I'm like, "Hey man, it's great." You're gonna be like, "Hey, your energy feels a little off, right?" And then that's a reason that you won't trust me, or that you'll pull back, and you're like, "Oh," and you'll start to mitigate how you handle me because I'm not being honest. And so for me, like you said a minute ago, I watch so many people go to the how, but the how can only be figured out when the why is there because it doesn't really matter, right? Like you could tell me right now you want to make pancakes. There's 100 different ways to make pancakes,
Yeah.
and the end result will taste the same.
Exactly.
It just depends on how you get there. And so if you know that your why is, I'm going to die if I don't eat pancakes, and I don't give you a pan, you're still going to figure out a way to cook them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so I think that's a really important way to describe what you said, but also tie in relationships, because if your why is, I want to build relationships because I want to expand my network and I want to add value to their life and I want to learn from them. Well, great. When you meet them, you have to tell them that. And that's the only way that you'll establish quality relationships. And like, if I open the Rolodex on my phone, I honestly think that the only reason I have the ability to reach out and touch these people that most people don't is because, like, hey, what do you think? I'm like, I think that's a dumb fucking idea.
Yeah.
And they're like, do you know who I am? I'm like, yeah, you're Steve.
Yeah.
And they're like, I'm like, yeah, no, you're not a billionaire. I don't care about your house. I don't care the fact you own an NBA team. Doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, my answer is the same regardless, right? And it's a really, really good protective measure, because I will tell you right now, there's nobody in my life that isn't actually my friend.
Cool. That's great. That's great.
So that would be my answer to that.
That's great. I think it brings everything back into the same sort of realm where we started with self-awareness, self-discipline, intention. Because as you said, building, having authentic relationships means you need to be comfortable with yourself. You need to be grounded. You need to be authentic. And if you're not self-aware, you're always trying to pretend to be somebody else. As you said, like you will give off that sense. People will smell it on you. So this has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you so much. We went way over time, but yeah,
I had a blast. It was fun.
Thank you so much for being with us and sharing your experience. You've done tremendous things and worked with some of the best players in the world. Now, if people they want to reach out to you, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, I try to make it easy. The best place to find me is at mindofgeorge.com, mindofgeorge. My podcast is there. It's free. I have trainings there for free. I have a Facebook group there for free. And my team and my team of 3, me and 2 others, will do anything in our power to help you. So you can really, and he will attest to this, you can reach out and ask us a question and we will respond. It is a rule in our company.
I can tell you one thing, if you find a more active group, like more supportive group, Facebook group than George's, like I'm just blown away by the value you provide, the support you provide. Each individual comment is answered like within minutes. It's just mind-boggling. I just don't know. And 3 people do that. I have no idea how you do that.
Well, and then everybody's like, how do you build 7-8-figure businesses? And I was like, and they're like, you don't even have social media. I'm like, because it's about depth, not width.
Yeah,
that's the secret. And so mindofgeorge.com. I'd love you subscribe to the podcast. I do 3 a week. We're going to go to 5 a week. I talk about this stuff and business and marketing and anything else you imagine, and anything you need. You can shoot us a message in our Facebook group. We will do anything we can to help you answer your questions or anything that we can.
Great. Thank you so much, George. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Ben.